This is the story of when I met the fairies in Scotland. For the longest time I'd had a calling to go to Scotland, and I never knew why. I come from England in the UK. For the last few years before I went to Scotland, the calling to go there was getting stronger and stronger, to a point where I just couldn't ignore it no more. When I sold my house, I decided to go and live in Scotland. On the way there, as I passed the border between England and Scotland, I felt so excited. I knew exactly why I was called. And I said to everybody jokingly, the fairies have called me here. Now everybody who knows me thinks I'm nuts already, so they just laugh and they say, oh, here we go again. So I've been like this my whole life. I've had one foot in this world, one foot in the other. To me, it's completely normal. So to say the fairies called me there, to me, is a completely normal thing to say and believe. So if anybody out there thinks I'm nuts, just turn off now. It's not going to get any better from this point on. This is the story of what happened. It was February 2016. It was Oban, Scotland, the west coast. I was temporarily homeless with my partner and my 2 dogs. We were living in our cars on the beach. We also stayed in car parks near Oban. It was absolutely bleak. It was freezing cold February. It was snowing. It was windy. It was a blizzard, and it was so cold in the car that I couldn't feel my fingers and toes. I put the engine on and warmed the car, but I couldn't leave it on for long because the petrol cost a lot of money, so I had to turn it back off. Within minutes of turning off the engine, the car was back into freezing cold temperature. I believe it was -3 at the time. But when you sat still in a car, it may as well be -400. It was just horrendous. So my partner said, let's go and drive to the forest car park, and let's go to the forest and spend the night in my tent. He had a tent in the forest because he'd lived there before he met me, and he considered that his home. He was a wild man. And when I met him, I lived on an island, so I thought I was quite refined. But when we came together, we ended up on an adventure. So I said, okay then, let's go to the tent. So we went to the tent, but on the way there, you had to walk through the forest. Now the forest is on a hill, and it is so difficult to navigate, even in the daylight. But this was a February evening. It was dark. The floor was muddy. It was really slippy. And because it was on a hill, as you walked up, it was very difficult to keep your balance. And so I kept sliding and falling down. I had to climb over trees. I had to crawl under trees because this was not on the beaten track. The reason why is because he did not ever want to be seen, and so he was hardly ever noticed there, because walkers would usually stick to the trail that led up through the forest, and this was so far away from there, most people didn't even bother to navigate to that point. So this was a really private spot, this tent. When we got there, the tent itself was beaten up. It was so old and so torn and such a mess, I was shocked. But my partner said, that's okay, I'm used to this, I'm used to living like this. And so I thought, God's sake, I'm just going to have to try and just do one night. When we got into the tent, the front of the tent where you go in had a broken zip and would only go down halfway. We goes into the bedroom department, and that zip also only went down halfway, and so the tent was even colder than usual because it was open to the elements. We set up our camping things. I got some mats on the floor and some a quilt and a sleeping bag. But within minutes it started to rain so hard, it was torrential. And that is when I started to realise I was getting wet, because the rain was rolling underneath the tent and coming up through the holes that had been chewed by the mice. Oh, I was miserable. I swear, I have never had a night so miserable as this. I was crying, I was angry, I was swearing, I was cursing, I was so distressed. I was sick of my life. We had nowhere else to go. We had no money. There was nothing. The only option we had was to stay in the tent or go back to the car. I couldn't get back to the car because it was so dark, and going down the hill would have been more treacherous than coming up. So I had no choice but to stay there for the night. Within a few moments of being there, I heard two men talking right outside the back of the tent. Now, I could not believe this. I could not believe that I could hear men talking. They appeared to be speaking English, yet I couldn't understand one word that they said. They sounded like middle-aged men, older men, and the conversation just seemed like an everyday conversation. There was no raised voices, it was just a normal chit-chat. And then the voices disappeared, and then it sounded like somebody was walking around the tent. Then suddenly, it felt like somebody had picked up a big stick and they whacked the tent 3 times. My dogs jumped up and started barking. I was absolutely petrified. I'm like, oh, what the hell's this? Somebody's here. But how could there be? How did these people get into the forest? How would they know that tent was there? Why would they have gone on such a bad night? The rain got heavier and heavier, and the wind got stronger and stronger, and then suddenly I heard music. And this music appeared to be coming from further up the forest. And it sounded like violins, whistles, and people singing, but all I heard was male voices. I was so distressed. I was on my knees and I was rocking backwards and forwards, and I had my eyes closed, and I was crying and praying to God to get me out of here. I hated it. The next thing I saw, and now when I say saw, only somebody psychic would understand what I'm saying here, because you can still see with your eyes closed if you have your third eye open. I can see faces coming towards me sometimes when I'm going to sleep. And so I saw the faces coming towards me. And some of them were grotesque and some of them were handsome, but they all looked like men, and they were all male, but some of them were absolutely hideous, and they tried to scare me. But I was so angry that it didn't work. I told them all to pee off. And some of them, their expressions changed, and they laughed. And they looked at me confused. And they didn't know how to take me at first. But as this kept going on, I soon realised that they were warming up to me, because I had so much fire in me. And then I felt they became my friend. The music got louder and louder, and I felt it was pulling me towards it. And it was captivating, it was hypnotising, it was absolutely amazing. And then the wind came around the tent, around the trees, and the trees sounded like an orchestra. You can hear voices and noises in the wind. But when you're in an hypnotic state and you're in a situation like that, I swear, you hear more than that. This was almost like the trees were singing just for us. It was like we had our own orchestra, our own entertainment. And I knew that the forest was full of spirits, and I knew they were looking out for us. The next thing, my dog Bonnie started to go absolutely ballistic. And I looked, and I opened my eyes, and in came this ball. It was a ball of light, and it was bouncing into the tent, and it was bouncing around everything and knocking things down, and the dogs started to bark and go mental, and I thought, this is amazing. I absolutely loved it. I didn't see any other form. I just saw the ball, and it was lit up. And bear in mind how dark it was in the forest. There was no light. And yet this was the only light, and it was so amazing. And the way it bounced around, it was like a child had just thrown it, and it was a bouncy ball. And then it just went out of the tent and disappeared. No sooner had it gone, the wind calmed down, the rain stopped, it went quiet, and I fell asleep. And the next day I spoke to my partner and I said, "Did I imagine all that last night?" And he said, "No, you met the fairies. Congratulations, Falbrook, you finally met them." And then he told me the story of the times he's met them himself, usually on long distance walks over the Pennine Way, but mostly on the west coast of Scotland. Now, I have heard them three times since then. 3 times they came back to me in Scotland. They hit my caravan 3 times. Once when I was on the holiday park, twice when I was at the bottom of the holiday park. Each time my caravan was hit 3 times. And then finally on the last time we were parked up on the beach and the wind was blowing yet again because it was winter, and I heard the music coming from the Isle of Lismore over towards the beach at Oban, and I heard that music again, and I heard that same man singing, and I swear it's the fairies. I came back to England not so long ago. We moved into a flat, and I have never seen or heard of them since. I know that the fairies live in Scotland. I know they're in Wales, and I know they're in Ireland. There is so much magic here, and I believe that only a few people will ever experience it. But I'll tell you something now, when you do, you never forget. Thank you for listening.